God bless you. This is part one of a three-part study on astronomy and the Bible. It combines some of my favorite things: astronomy, history, and theology. I believe God has revealed His glory in the stars. I believe God has presented His plan of salvation in the stars. But for some, this is confusing. It's a little like the chicken and the egg. What came first? What came first? The Jesus story as presented in the Gospels, or Greek, Egyptian, and Assyrian mythologies? This actually is an issue. For example, hundreds of years before the birth of Jesus, the Greeks wrote down this story, a story that they saw depicted in the stars. It's about Orion, who is the son of a mighty god, and because he has a great love for the Pleiades, which is a cluster of 7 stars, Orion embarks on a great journey, and while on this journey he walks on water, and he shows himself to have dominion over the lake of fire, and he fights and then overwhelms the evil beast. In this battle he is bruised on the heel, but ultimately he overcomes by destroying the beast on the head. Well, that sounds a little like the Jesus story, who is the Son of God, who embarks on a journey from heaven and walks on water and shows himself to have dominion over the lake of fire. He fights evil and is bruised on the heel, which is a prophetic reference to what happened to Jesus on the cross. He was bruised on the heel, but ultimately he overcame and wounded Satan on the head. Now remember, the Greek story predates the writing of the Gospels by hundreds of years. So did Jesus somehow mimic or plagiarize aspects of Greek mythology? Or is there a much older prophetic story that predates the Greek story? I believe the truth is Jesus did not mimic the Greek story. The Greeks corrupted an older prophetic story. And that older story, which is prophetic and true, is the story, the prophecy that Jesus fulfilled. In the beginning, God said, "Let there be light." God created solar systems, planets, stars, galaxies, and more. What we know about the mysteries of space and creation is only a fraction of what there is. From the dawn of human history, individuals have looked up at the stars, have seen pictures in the stars, told stories about what they saw in the stars. Satan knew that our eyes are constantly drawn up toward the heavens, so he led in the creation of mythologies, and through false teachings he hoped that humanity would not see the truth that is revealed in the heavens. I believe that in the beginning, before astronomy was corrupted by astrology, inspired celestial stories were given to man by God as kind of a prophetic message revealing God's love, humanity's need, Satan's wrath, and the Messiah's ultimate victory. God's story of salvation is written in the stars. Psalm 19 is true. The heavens declare the glory of God. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 14, we read, "And God said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens, to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days, and for years." Genesis 1:14 notes that there are signs in the heavens. The celestial movements have more than just one purpose. They more than just announce the new year or the new month or the new day. They announce or point to a great truth. Job 38, verses 31 through 33. "Canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth in his season? Knowest thou the ordinances of heaven?" Note here that the ancient star chart is called by its Hebrew term Mazzaroth, rather than its modern term zodiac. The word zodiac comes from the Greek word zodiakos, and it means a circle of animals or creatures. The ancients saw celestial constellations as a wheel that circled or rotated around the earth. Job 26 references the constellations as pillars of heaven. He writes, "By God's Spirit he has garnished the heavens." Garnished with what? With the constellations. And he writes that these are part of his ways. That is, they point to a great spiritual truth. There are 12 major constellations. There are many smaller constellations, but there are 12 major constellations. And each of these 12 major constellations have 3 associated constellations. These 3 smaller associated constellations are sometimes called decans or sidereal pieces. God has presented the salvation plan in these 12 constellations and their 36 associated sidereal pieces. The story begins with the constellation Virgo. Virgo is a constellation that appears prominently in the fall. It is associated with the beginning of the Hebrew year. The constellation Virgo appears as a woman. The ancients saw her as a virgin. This constellation, Virgo, can be associated with God's promise in Genesis 3:15. It was in Eden that God spoke to the serpent, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. It will bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." Genesis 3:15 is the first prophecy in the Bible. And the unfolding of that prophecy is tied to Virgo, who is the virgin, the instrument that God will use to bring the Messiah to our world. Isaiah 7:14 says it this way, "Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." The constellation Virgo is presented as a woman, a virgin, with a shock of wheat in her left hand and a branch in her right. The brightest star in the constellation is a seed in the wheat. The star is called Spica, a Latin word which means the branch. Her child, the Messiah, is the branch. The Old Testament refers to the coming Savior as a branch. Zechariah the prophet called him the branch. So the first major constellation introduces the thought that the Messiah will be born of a virgin. The 3 sidereal or associated constellations to Virgo help to tell this story. First, there is Coma, which is a smaller constellation noting the virgin with her son. The word Coma literally means the desired. For the child in the lap of the mother represents the desired one. The Bible refers to the Messiah as the desired of the ages. And it's important to note the positioning of Coma relative to the major constellation Virgo. Coma is presented above Virgo, which to the ancients meant that in a very unusual way, this smaller constellation of a child was somehow greater in importance than the major constellation of the mother. But this child is special. It was born of a virgin, and Isaiah 7:14 notes that they shall call his name Emmanuel. Emmanuel means God with us. So there is a special divine nature in this small child, which gives him prominence. So it is right that his location is above the major constellation Virgo. The second associated constellation is Boötes. He is presented as a shepherd bearing his rod or staff, and he's also a harvestman. In one hand there is a sickle. So the staff presents him as the humble, gentle shepherd, but the sickle presents him as being one of authority and power, the great reaper, the one who is the owner of the harvest, who will reap the harvest at the perfect time. The word Boötes means the coming one. Another name for the constellation was taken from a star in the left leg of the shepherd. The star is Arcturus, which means he cometh. And then finally there's Centaurus. In ancient star charts, the centaur is pictured as half human and half horse. That, however, is not the original concept of the constellation. It really means two natures. The two natures of Centaurus represents the humanity and deity of Jesus Christ. He is God clothed in human flesh, and therefore can rightly be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. So here's where we're at so far in the celestial story. The constellation Virgo announces God's plan to do a mighty work through a virgin. The three sidereal constellations to Virgo note that the virgin will have a child, Coma. The child will be a shepherd, that's Bootes. And the sidereal constellation Centaurus indicates that this child will have two natures. The second major constellation is Libra. And there are two ancient stories that emerge from this constellation. The first rendering of Libra was that of a lamp. It looks like the center of the ancient menorah pieces. It looks like the tip of a flame. And as you look at the constellation Libra, proximate to the constellation Scorpio, it appears as if Scorpio is trying to seize the lamp. He wants to be the light or destroy the light. It's important to note that Scorpio, representing evil, is below Libra, which represents the light. And the constellation Libra has often been depicted as a set of scales. Libra, as a set of scales, represents the condition of the human race after the fall. Daniel 5:27 notes, "Thou art weighed in the balances and are found wanting." The sign of Libra has been associated with justice, and throughout the centuries it has been depicted in courtrooms and buildings of law and justice. Here's another look at a portion of the constellation Libra. And here you can see that there are two prominent stars in the balances which help to tell the story. In one of the sides of the scales, there's a prominent star named Zubin al-Janubi, and it means the price which is deficient. Deficient. This points to the price which man might attempt to pay for redemption. But there's no way we can pay the price that is due. Whatever we bring to the table is deficient. That's what Zubin al-Janubi represents. But there's good news, because on the other side of the scale, there's a prominent star named Zubin al-Chamali, and that star means the price which covers. It is a picture of the price paid by Jesus Christ for the redemption of mankind. Though humanity stood guilty, deficient, utterly unable to pay the debt that the scales of justice said was due, a special accommodation was made. The three associated or sidereal constellations give additional definition to this story. The first sidereal constellation is Crux. This constellation reveals how the Son of the Virgin, the one who is the great shepherd, the one who has two natures, it reveals how he was going to pay the price. Crux is the Southern Cross. The Son of the Virgin, the Messiah, would die on the cross to pay the price for our salvation. The second sidereal constellation to Libra is Lupus. The Latins named it Victima, which means the victim. A victim is one who is innocent. So though the Son of the Virgin would go to the cross and die on the cross, it would not be because he was guilty. The Messiah would live a sinless life, a perfect life, and be that perfect sacrifice. He would go to the cross willingly as an innocent, a victim for you and for me. And the third associated constellation to Libra is the Corona Borealis. It is the northern crown. It's a beautiful semicircle of a half a dozen prominent stars in the northern hemisphere. So here's what the three sidereal constellations to Libra communicate. The seed of the woman becomes the victim and goes to the cross, and in doing so pays the price that covers, and then is honored with the crown of glory, the corona borealis. Now the third major constellation in God's celestial story of salvation is Scorpio. He's generally represented as a scorpion, though in early cultures he's depicted as a dragon or a serpent. Here we have the introduction of the enemy. The sidereal constellations note what he will attempt to do and how he will be overcome. As noted earlier, some cultures have him trying to seize the lamp. Scorpio wants to be the light of the world. In other cultures, Scorpio is seen trying to sting the heel of the mighty champion Ophiuchus, who is seen in the ancient star charts wrestling with the great snake called serpens. So while the scorpion is trying to wound the heel of the champion Ophiuchus, the head of the scorpion is being wounded. It is said that the word Scorpio means lawless one. The star in the heart of Scorpio is Antares, and when seen on a clear night, the star gives the appearance of a deep red color. The name Antares means the wounding. There are three sidereal pieces to the constellation Scorpio: Serpens, Ophiuchus, and Hercules, and these help tell the story of the conflict of good and evil that begins with Scorpio. First, there is Serpens. Serpens represents Satan, who has tried to usurp the throne of God. He is seen here in this star chart trying to grab the northern crown, but he cannot do so because he's being held back by the champion Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus, the champion, is obviously a view of Christ who restrains and overcomes evil. Here's another star chart showing what that looks like. While the scorpion is trying to wound the heel of the champion Ophiuchus, the hero Ophiuchus wounds the head of Scorpio, it's a reference to Genesis 3:15, and as the head of the lawless one is bruised, the champion holds back Serpens, keeping him from obtaining the northern crown. And the final sidereal constellation to Scorpio is Hercules. He is another representation of the hero, the Messiah, the son of the Virgin, who overcomes evil. He's depicted in star charts beating a many-headed snake with his club. The snake is often pictured as being in the branch of a tree, perhaps a reference to the tree in the Garden of Eden. So the sidereal constellations in Scorpio note that there will be a conflict between good and evil, that evil will bruise the heel of the hero in the story, which is the child of the Virgin Virgo, but the hero will wound the evil one on the head and restrain him, keeping him from usurping authority and seizing the northern crown. And the final constellation in this first part of God's celestial story is Sagittarius. Sagittarius appears in the form of a centaur, half human, half horse. This is the same concept that we saw in one of the peripheral constellations to Virgo. It's a sidereal piece which represents the two natures of the Redeemer. He is deity and he is human. He is both triumphant and victorious. And as he, the seed of the Virgin, the Messiah, appears here in the form of a centaur, we are reminded that our Savior will return one day, riding on an elegant, flying, celestial white stallion. The main actor or component in the constellation is the archer. The centaur or God-man has a great bow in his hand, and the arrow of the bow is aimed directly at Scorpio, who is the enemy. Sagittarius, like the other major constellations, has three sidereal pieces which help to tell the story. The first is Lyra, Lyra is a small star group. It's pictured as a harp, and it refers to the praise so richly deserved by Sagittarius. The brightest star in the constellation Lyra is Vega. It means he shall be exalted. It reminds us of the praise that we read about in the book of Revelation, the praise that takes place around the throne of God. Thou hast redeemed us to God by the blood. The host of heaven will sing, blessing and honor and glory and power be unto him that sitteth upon the throne and unto the Lamb forever and ever. It's Revelation 5, verses 9 and 13. There's Lyra, the harp, and then there is Aura. Aura appears further to the south. It is the second sidereal piece. It is an altar. And it's interesting to point out that the constellation Aura appears upside down. The extended piece at the bottom of the altar represents the fire of the altar being poured out. This is another way to look at it. So Aura is tipped upside down. Here's another way to look at it. Fire on the altar should never go out. In Leviticus chapter 6, verse 12, for example, we read, the fire on the altar must be kept burning. It must not go out. Every morning the priest is to add firewood and arrange the burnt offerings on it. But again, in the heavens, Aura is tipped upside down. Here's another way to look at it. Here is the view of the bottom portion of the constellation Aura. An altar spilled out with its holy fire spilling out throughout the heavens. From our perspective, it looks like it flows into the beginning point of the Milky Way. And by the way, the word Aura, the name of this upturned altar, it literally means it is finished. There is no more need for a sacrifice of sin because the Messiah has already paid that price. He's covered our debt by becoming the victim and dying on the cross. The final constellation to this story and the final sidereal piece to the great constellation Sagittarius is Draco. Draco is the dragon. This staging of the dragon concludes the first act in the prophetic drama, or God's story of salvation. Draco is a long, winding constellation made up of many stars. These stars wrap around the northernmost part of the hemisphere. It covers about 1/3 of the heavens, and it reminds us of what we read in Revelation chapter 12. There appeared a wonder in the heavens, and behold, a great dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads. And his tail drew 1/3 part of the stars of heaven. Here's another star chart depicting Draco. It's important to note that in the constellation Draco there is a prominent star named Thurbin. And about 4,700 years ago, the great dragon star Thurbin was the northernmost star. It was the polar star, or the North Star. Now, Polaris is the North Star, and Thurbin has fallen from its place. Over the centuries, Draco fell from its lofty position and has been replaced. It reminds us of what we read in Isaiah 14. How you have fallen from heaven, O day star, son of the dawn. How you are cut down to the ground. You who laid the nations low, you have said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven, above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to Sheol, to the depths of the pit. So the first part, or the first act of the great celestial drama, profiles the birth of the Messiah, the reason for his coming to redeem a guilty humanity. He does this by going to the cross as a victim and thwarts the plan of Satan. The first act ends with the dragon in a rage, considering his next move. In the second act of this great story, we see the drama continues through the constellations Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, and Aries. These constellations explain not so much the person of the Redeemer, but the result of his redeeming work, particularly in relation to the people who are redeemed, that is, the church. So the first set of constellations profiled his coming. The second set of constellations will profile the work of the church, and the final constellations will profile his second coming. The heavens declare the glory of God. Astrology, mythology may be interesting, but astronomy is true. In a study of the stars, one finds the true, original, prophetic story of God's plan to save humanity. Are you saved? Do you believe the story as presented in the heavens and in the Gospels? Do you know what Jesus has done for you? Have you accepted his gift of salvation? Right now, you have a chance to do that. To believe, to receive, and to be saved. May God bless you as you consider his word.